I have the distinct honor of introducing our panelists for the evening. If I actually read their bios, we would be here for about 30 minutes. But I've shortened it. The Honorable Larry D. Thompson, former United States Deputy Attorney General. One of the most distinguished legal leaders in modern American history. Mr. Thompson served as Deputy Attorney General of the United States from 2001 to 2003, becoming the first African American to hold the nation's second highest position in the Justice Department. In that role, he was Chief Operating Officer of the department, overseeing federal law enforcement agencies and helping guide the nation through a physical and pivotal period following the September 11th attack. His leadership helped shape national policy on criminal justice, national security, and corporate accountability. Before and after his service at the Justice Department, Mr. Thompson built a remarkable career bringing public service and the private sector together. He later served as an executive vice president and general counsel of PepsiCo, where he led global legal compliance and ethics operations for one of the world's largest corporations. Throughout his career, he has been widely respected for his commitment to integrity, ethical leadership, and public trust. Today, Mr. Thompson continues to be sought after voice on leadership, law, ethics, and public responsibility. We are deeply honored to have him share his insights with us this evening. Please welcome Larry Thompson. The Honorable Timothy Walmsley, Judge, Superior Court of Georgia. We are pleased to welcome him as well, a respected jurist who has dedicated his career to public service and the rule of law here in Georgia. Judge Walmsley serves on the Superior Court of Brunswick Judicial Circuit, where he presides over complex criminal and civil matters and plays a critical role in the administration of justice in our area. Prior to joining the bench, he served as district attorney, where he earned a reputation of fairness, professionalism, and a strong commitment to community safety and accountability. Throughout his career, Judge Walmsley has been known for his thoughtful approach to justice, his deep understanding of the law, and his belief in the courts as a cornerstone of the democratic society. His experience as both prosecutor and judge gives him a uniquely well-rounded perspective on the challenges and responsibilities of the justice system. Please join me in welcoming the Honorable Judge Timothy Walmsley to Mayor.
Well, welcome everyone, and I'm so very happy to be sitting here with these two wonderful public servants who have honored the practice of law for so many years, and you've blessed our community, and you've honored the law, as I said, and it's wonderful to be with you. So I think we'll just jump right into it, if that's okay. And the first question I have for you, gentlemen, is really for both of you. Most people, and I also welcome the students especially, I'm so glad to see so many of you here, but most people, and particularly students, often believe that a person is born into whatever position of responsibility he or she happens to rise to, and many do not realize that even leaders who achieve much, they suffer failures and they suffer successes. And so, General Thompson, how did your path take you from your early life to private practice to United States Attorney for the Northern District of Georgia, to the Deputy Attorney General, to the General Counsel for PepsiCo, and if you could explain what leadership lessons maybe you learned along the way?
Well, thank you, Judge. It's really a pleasure to be here. Before I answer your question, though, I would like to just say that my wife and I, we live in Glenn County, and it's an honor and a privilege to be here with Judge Walmsley. Judge Walmsley is a dedicated public servant. He skillfully and wisely presided over the most important trial I think we've had in this county, certainly during my time living here. So, Judge, I again want to express my personal thanks and respect to you for what you've done. have a direct path to the law. I had very good parents. Neither one of them graduated from high school. My dad worked on the railroad. He was a switchman. My mother was a part-time cook. She didn't work when my dad was working, but he would, from time to time, get laid off from the railroad. So she went to work then. And we're in a college setting, the importance of teachers. I wanted to be a social worker. And I asked one of my professors to write a recommendation for me to the Washington University School of Social Work in St. Louis, Missouri. He was a history professor. And at the end of class, he called me up to the podium and said, "Mr. Thompson, I got your request. I have written the letter that you requested. And there's no doubt in my mind that you're going to be a great social worker. But have you thought about the law?" This is a professor. I had not thought about the law. I didn't know any lawyers. It didn't even enter my mind to think about the law. And I then, he advised me to go see the pre-law counselor at my school. And I went to see him and changed the courses I was taking, and I haven't looked back since. And so I think about that occasion and what you and your colleagues do here at the Coastal College of Georgia. And I'm sure you've made the same kind of impact on your students as Professor Sperry did on me many years ago. Now, on leadership, this is my 52nd year practicing law. I've had my license for 52 years. And you don't start out as a lawyer being a leader, but leadership does involve teamwork. And over the years, I've learned one thing about teamwork, and that is, as the leader of a team, there's no limit as to what you can accomplish as long as you do not care who gets the credit. And that's been one of the tenets of leadership that has guided me over the years.
Let me begin by echoing something Larry just said. I appreciate the opportunity to be here in Glenn County. My home county is actually Chatham County, so I'm an hour and a half up the road. And I had the opportunity to work here, I guess 4 years ago now, and spent a good amount of time in Glenn County. This is a great community. This is a great school. Thank you, President Evans, for the invitation to be here. Thank you, Judge, for doing this, and thank you, Larry. I looked at the title of this talk, and I got a little bit of a chuckle. To say that I'm kind of awestruck sitting here next to who I'm sitting next to would be an understatement. I appreciate the fact that everybody has a great deal of respect for what I do. This man next to me is a great public servant. My path to where I am is about as indirect as they come. If you had asked me even 20 years ago when I was a lawyer, would I be a Superior Court judge in Chatham County, I would have answered that with a no. Are you kidding me? I'm not originally from Georgia. I'm originally from overseas. My undergraduate, first of all, I've got no lawyers in my family. My undergraduate degree is environmental science and marine biology. So I know there's a big environmental science program here, so for those of you environmental scientists, props. So if you had told me that law would be where I ended up, and then more importantly, as a Superior Court judge, that just wasn't the plan. What did end up happening was I went to work for a big environmental consulting firm in Washington, D.C. with that environmental background. And we were producing reports for lawyers. And what I ultimately decided was that I wanted to move up the chain, the decision-making chain. And that's really what drove me to law school. It was not trial work. It was not to be a Superior Court judge. It was simply to get more involved in an area that I thought was interesting. And so to the students that are here, find your passion. It doesn't really matter ultimately what you do as an undergraduate. As long as you find your passion, You work hard at it. You meet individuals that will mentor you, and you meet individuals that will support you. And ultimately, the path will go in a direction that makes a lot of sense. And so do the things you love to do, learn how to learn. This is a great community to do it in. As to leadership, similar to what Larry just said, my view of leadership is that I cannot do the job of many of the people that work for me on the court. I couldn't begin to be a sheriff's deputy. I could be a staff attorney, but I'm not sure that that's a direction I would have gone in. I can't do the administrative side of the work. I've got a great admin. I've got a criminal case manager that knows how to manage criminal cases. And I let them do their work. I don't micromanage. And the individuals that work for me have been stable for over 14 years because of that. So I've got great people that work for me because I've given them the flexibility and the opportunity to excel. They make mistakes. I take responsibility for those mistakes because it's my court. But ultimately, I rely on those people to help me do my work. And we've done it at a very high level for quite some time.
Thank you, Judge. As was mentioned earlier, you were appointed to preside over the 2021 R-rated murder trial, which was held in Glenn County, received nationwide attention, and the trial resulted in the convictions of all 3 defendants. I know that the case is under appeal. I know there are some things you probably can't talk about, but if you can talk about some of your observations, some of the things maybe that you learned during that experience, and could you describe also while you're doing that, at least for my students especially, the primary duties of a Superior Court judge and what you have to do and how a judge has to balance the law fairly while recognizing the human impact of your decisions, the court decisions.
Sure. So Superior Court, just I'll give the 10,000 view or 10,000 foot view of Superior Court. Many of you have probably lived in Georgia all your lives, so if this is remedial, I apologize. Superior Court. Superior Court in the state of Georgia is the highest level trial court, the court of general jurisdiction. Basically, anything that can be tried in the state of Georgia can be tried in Superior Court. So week to week, one week I could hear a murder case, the next week I could hear a divorce, modification, child custody. The next week it could be title to real property. We are the only court where you can go and get an injunction. We have broad authority. We're the only place you can do an adoption. Happy days in Superior Court are adoption days. So we do a few things that I will describe as fun, like adoptions, but we really do sort of the hard work day to day of the courts. On the Aubrey matter, as the judge mentioned, the matter's still technically in my court, so I can't really talk about the details of Aubrey. What I will say this, and I want to make this point while in Glenn County. Not being from Glenn County, I came to this community as a bit of a blank slate. I also came to this community at a time when the narrative in this country was that a community like Glenn County, Brunswick, a case like the Aubrey case couldn't be tried in this community. And that bothered me. I mentioned that I'm not originally from even the States, but I've lived in the South long enough to know many of the tensions and narratives that were described in the Aubrey case, but it bothered me that there were many people out there that said that this community couldn't do that. So I want to say publicly to those that were involved in managing that in this community, thank you. Thank you for doing the hard work. As to the case itself, what did I learn? I learned to be a different type of judge even. It was an experience that is very hard to describe. It was a life-altering experience for me. And I say that because I had been on the Superior Court at the time for 9 years. I had tried countless murders, but I had never been involved in a case that involved the courts on such a public level and such a national level. And so what I took from the case was how important it was as a judge to ensure that no matter what ended up happening in that case, whether you agreed with the verdict or not, people could accept the verdict. That the rule of law took its place in the public consciousness, and that ultimately people looked at what was done here in Glynn County and saw that it was fair, and that this community could in fact produce a fair verdict.
Well, thank you, Judge, and if I can take a point of personal privilege, having been a man who served a long time in the field of criminal justice, you handled your court honorably, and you handled it well. And as a personal matter, I want to thank you, and I'm sure the citizens of Glynn County want to thank you for the job you did. So, well, gentlemen, one thing that we could segue into, and this again is for both of you, General Thompson and Judge, one of the ethical considerations that when you're handling a high-profile case, especially, that one has to consider from both the bench and from as a U.S. attorney or even a deputy attorney general.
Well, in terms of a criminal case, I'll speak in terms of a criminal case because, and I, as Judge Atwood mentioned, I served as the United States Attorney for the Northern District of Georgia during President Reagan's term from 1982 through 1986. And the Department of Justice has a lot of power, and I think that power has to be exercised responsibly, because at the end of the day, you can take a citizen's freedom from that person. And you really need to exercise that power, I think, not only responsibly, but with restraint. So one of the things I try to impart to my assistant United States attorneys who worked under me was that we would commence investigations only on a basis of fairness, no improper influences, no partisan influences. We would stress fairness and restraint versus trying to get a technical advantage. And I think as the chief prosecutor in the Northern District of Georgia, it was not only my job to represent the government zealously and secure convictions for those people who deserve to be convicted and in prison, but it was also my job to instill trust in the judicial system. Again, fairness versus trying to take an advantage. And I remember one of the things I always stressed is it was not our job just to proceed to get a conviction. Justice is always done, I think, in federal courts, certainly, when the United States not necessarily doesn't win, the United States always wins when justice is done in the case. It's not the federal prosecutor's job to just proceed to try to take every advantage and just get a conviction and no consideration for our professional responsibility, our professional ethics. So that's the way I try to proceed during my time as a federal prosecutor.
Ms. Walmsley?
Yeah, so let me sort of dovetail into that word that we used, and it's justice. So let's talk about justice. Right. What is justice? Justice, I think if I don't know how many people are in this room, it holds what, 120, there's maybe 100 people in this room or more. If I asked every one of you what is justice, I bet I would come up with 50 different definitions, right? Okay. So my view of the work in Superior Court and the sort of the ethical side of it is we are a court of law, right? They don't call us a court of justice, right? Because justice, that definition is so hard to put a finger on. Law, on the other hand, law is something that we can look at and we can hold on to. And as long as we are strictly adhering to the law, some interesting things happen, right? We get equity, we get due process, we get all of those things that we look at ultimately as fundamental fairness. And so if I can go home at the end of the day and be confident that I have at least provided litigants in my courtroom with a fair trial, then justice is done in my mind. And so this is the way I kind of look at it. Sort of turns it a little bit differently. But day to day, I see pro se parties. I see well-heeled, silk-stalking lawyers. I see lawyers that are just really trying to make sure that the lights stay on. I see a lot of different individuals, and every single one of them has a different idea on what to expect, other than the fact that they get treated fairly.
And in response to what the judge said, I think an important part of the process, making certain that the process is fair from the prosecutor's standpoint, is always respecting the court, respecting the judge, and always being candid with the judge. I recently read where an assistant United States attorney, and I don't know exactly where it was, refused to cite a case that was directly on point to the judge. The judge asked the attorney, do you have a case on point that will help me decide this case? And the prosecutor refused to cite the case. And I think that's inexcusable. And that would have never happened in any office that I led.
I think I would have to ask how that worked out for me. Well, a little bit of a lighter note, we have several students here that have expressed interest in law school, and an even larger group that expressed interest in going into public service. So what advice would you have for them? And I would like you to drill down a little bit, if you would, on particular courses or skills or experiences that the students maybe should focus on whenever they're out there, they want to go to work, either in law or law enforcement or public service. And maybe if there were any, what role that mentors did play for you in your life and your successful careers that you have, and how students can seek out a meaningful mentorship and that sort of thing.
Yeah, public service, I view it sort of as a calling. I stepped out of, in fact, I got one of my former partners here, Janet Shirley. I stepped out of a relatively, I guess, a larger regional firm to go into public service. Because the way I look at public service, or the way I look at the court, is it gives me an opportunity day in and day out to have an impact on people's lives. And there's something that can be said for that. Now, there's certain sacrifices associated with doing that. But you got to be willing to make those sacrifices and go into public service. I do think that's a good opportunity to throw a hook out there, particularly to students. Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know. I think we're in a cycle. I mentioned to somebody, I think, in the elevator a little bit earlier. We're in a cycle right now where for some reason, particularly in the area of law, that public service just doesn't seem to be a calling for many. And I don't really understand that. There's so much that can be learned from doing the work that's out there in the public. And so I encourage students to think about it. What skills do you need? You need a lot of patience. Right? You need the ability to sort of get through the day, get through the work. But those are skills that really you need in the private practice too. And so I guess I'm sort of fumbling along with this because I just view public service as a bit of a calling. I think it's something that's worth thinking about. And if you haven't thought about it, it's worth taking a moment to think about what you can do for your community. And if you can do that professionally and get paid to do it, it is a quite rewarding thing to do. I've had a lot of opportunities to get involved in a great many different things that are important in my community simply because of what I do for a living. So I encourage public service. There are sacrifices associated with it, but it's worth it.
Well, I agree with the judge. Public service is a calling, but I can candidly say that there's perhaps a more selfish reason for public service. I think, having been a prosecutor early in my career, I think public service has made me a better lawyer. It has improved me in terms of my professional skills, has enabled me to represent my clients better after I left public service. So from that standpoint, there's a selfish reason for it. However, I would say if you really want to take the advantages of public service, and I've been a public servant 3 times in my career, you really have to stop worrying about money. I've taken 3 pay cuts in my 52-year career, and when President Bush called me and asked me would I be willing to serve in his administration as the Deputy Attorney General of the United States, I was 55 years old. You know, I wasn't a spring chicken. And I had to take a job that resulted in about a 90% pay cut at 55. My financial advisor thought I was crazy. And he said, how long do you expect to live? Because you're going to have to make that up. But actually, it's a great deal of satisfaction. It is a calling. And now at this stage in my life, I look back and I absolutely have no regrets for spending a great deal of my career in service to my fellow citizens.
Judge?
Well, yeah, on the public service issue, as was just alluded to, yeah, it's an opportunity to do things that you're not going to find with lawyers' private practice, and meet people. It's just a different way of doing it, and yeah, when I said sacrifice, there's a sacrifice to it. But you got to be willing to make those sacrifices to be true to what you really want to do. I stepped on the bench at 42, which was relatively young. I was on the management committee at the law firm, and the opportunity to come on the bench came along, and it would have been very easy to say no. But in hindsight, there would have been a great deal of regret there. So I've now had an opportunity to do this for 15 years, and every day is a challenge, and every day at the same time is very rewarding.
It may be like in other aspects of your life, you also need a good partner or spouse. And obviously, if my wife was not happy with me taking a huge pay cut at age 55, I wouldn't have been the Deputy Attorney General. So that's another important practical aspect.
Yeah, my wife is here, so thank you, Allison.
Good cover there. The reason I tossed the ball back to you on that question for a second shot is because people don't realize what public service and what the dedication that you two gentlemen have shown. Even though you are in high office and were in high office, you still, you have to be dedicated to it, and it is a sacrifice to a degree. And I want to thank y'all for doing that and for what you have done. And also, when you're starting to touch on it, I would like you to maybe speak to something that is often not thought about, but I think is very important, and that's the balance, demanding the balance of a judicial career and a career in the law with your family life. Can you make some comments in that area for us?
Yeah, it is so I have 2 boys, one's in college and one's a senior in high school, and they have been straddled with the burden of being Judge Walmsley's kids for a long time. So there are challenges. High profile, and Larry, very, very high profile. High profile positions bring their own burdens. They bring their own challenges. Being on the court, particularly in this day and age, where there seems to be a lot more discussion about the independent judiciary and what the judiciary's role really is in not just our communities, but with regard to civics even. We are the people who Superior Court judges seem to be some of the people that folks go to for an explanation on what's going on. Why are things happening the way they're happening? Why are rulings coming out in certain ways? And so we find ourselves very involved in a lot of those discussions. On the family level, that means social events, and a lot of what we do, we don't ever get away from being public figures. And I'm not complaining about that by any stretch of the imagination. But I am Judge Walmsley, no matter where I go and no matter what I do. And because of that, my wife and my family, they are also the wife and kids of Judge Walmsley. There's another aspect to it. There's a security side of it that is challenging. The reality is that there's not a lot that can be done to help us on the security side. The state of Georgia tries to help us, at least on the Superior Court. I can't speak to the feds, but that's a concern. I've been in public office now for 15 years, and I've lost count of the number of times that there have been direct threats. Again, being in Glenn County, being associated with the Aubrey case, I'll tell a little anecdote. I had a police officer parked in front of my house for a year and a half. And my oldest son, who was a sophomore in high school at the time, came home one night and said, "Dad, how long are these police officers going to be parked in front of the house?" I said, I don't know, a year and a half. He said, "Well, Dad, none of my friends are going to want to come to the house. I said, "Son, I don't know what you think you're going to be doing in my house." I'm absolutely fine with that. But there are those issues just associated with drugs.
Well, I served, as Judge Atwood said, right after 9/11 in the National Security Council because of the threats that high-level people in the Department of Justice were receiving, decided that the Deputy Attorney General had to have a security detail. And if you can't imagine how your life is changed when you cannot go out and shop, you cannot go to the pharmacy without a member of your security detail tagging along. I had the United States Marshal Service as my security detail for the 3+ years that I was in office. But in terms of getting outside of your professional responsibilities, from the time that I was a young lawyer to today, I've really tried to have another life. My wife and I collect art. We try to do as much of that together as possible in terms of going to art galleries, going to art exhibits, dealing with artists. And as I look back, Judge, I think being able to, I was a trial lawyer for the first half of my career, and being a trial lawyer, you have to have an understanding of people because you're going to be looking jurors in the eye and in very important and sensitive cases. And I think, just looking back, having another life, as much as I could possibly squeeze in, really made me a better lawyer. It made lawyers really need, especially trial lawyers, you really need to have an instinct for people. You need to understand people. You need to understand how the facts of your case will impact the jurors, how they will impact the judge. And so, looking back, I didn't do as much as I probably should have. I will confess that. But I do think I'm glad for that, and I think it made me a better lawyer.
So I'm going to echo that. I think Larry hits on a really good point. No matter what you do in your career, don't let your career become you. I mean, I mentioned that I can't get away from being Judge Walmsley, and the reason I say that is because you have to get away from it. And particularly the students out there, don't let what you do define you, right? Find other things. Find things you enjoy doing with your family or whoever else. Because again, as Larry said, being a well-rounded individual makes you a better professional.
Gentlemen, I think, as you know, we're celebrating Black History Month this month, and I think we would be remiss if we didn't ask that, how how has the issue of race evolved and changed in our legal system over the years? Do you think it has, or what insights you may have on
Judge, I write about this in my book. I call it the evergreen question because it's a question that has been with us since the founding of our country and probably will be with us for a lot longer. So let me begin by saying that racial, especially with respect to employment, it goes without saying, but I am going to say it, racial decisions based upon race, racial preferences, they're illegal, and they should be illegal. However, when you get beyond that, we need to think about there are other ways you can make decisions. You cannot make a decision on employment simply to redress past wrongs because you hurt another person. But from the business context, I think we have gotten away from thinking about, this is a dirty word to me, but diversity. And in the business context, and I'm thinking about diversity writ large, not just based upon gender or race, but diversity writ large is important to the success of a business. You want people with different backgrounds in your business. If you're a business person and you're running a sales organization, you want people with different backgrounds from different economic statuses of society. And there are all kinds of studies that show that more diverse businesses, and I mean writ large, more diverse businesses are more successful than the businesses that are less diverse. So I hope that we can get past just focusing on diversity in a narrow sense, but diversity writ large, and diversity for the purpose of making a business or an organization like this college better, as opposed to just focusing on racial preferences, which are illegal and should be.
Yeah, so I'm not going to begin to pretend to understand all of the various facets of that question and how to answer them appropriately, other than to say the bar is much more diverse than it was when I first joined the bar, and that is not a bad thing. And because of many of the things that Larry just said, bringing different perspectives into the law is important. Ultimately, lawyers, judges tend to be thought leaders in communities. And so as long as we can keep pushing against stereotypes, pushing back against stereotypes, I should say, then I think we are moving forward. This is a generational question. This is not a simple solution that I think my generation is going to decide we've taken care of. I don't know how many generations it will take until we get to the point where we won't have to answer questions like this. But I think my generation is better off than the prior generation, and I think the next will be better than the last. All that's to say, it's granular. The question's also very granular. I can only do what I do, right? I can only control what is around me that I have control of. And particularly when it comes to my profession and what I do in my profession, color does not matter to me. And then getting back to the Aubrey case, one of the things I found very disturbing about the Aubrey case was that the Aubrey case, again, could not be tried in this community for many of the reasons that are being touched upon with this question, or some of the facets associated with it. What ended up happening, I believe, in the Aubrey case is we set a data point out there. We didn't solve anything, but we did, in fact, address some narratives that were produced, and we've got a talking point. We've got proof that, in fact, things can be done the right way within our profession.
Thank you, Judge. In the few minutes that we have left, and I would like to finish as much as I can on this question of ethics. We've got several of our business school students here, but also our criminal justice students, and the ethical decision-making is so very, very critical in all those careers. But and do a crass commercial message. If you you didn't win the book, go buy it. It's a good one. It's a good read. And I have one question, first starting with you, General Thompson, on what are the most significant challenges that you faced as a United States attorney, especially in the area of ethics, but also for our business school, how did leading the corporate fraud task force shape your views on corporate accountability, and Judge, also ethical aspects of your job and what you hold lawyers to, what kind of standard they should be held to?
Well, right after 9/11, we in the Bush administration experienced another sort of disaster, another huge effort we had to undertake, and that is after the collapse of Enron and WorldCom. You all may remember those two big companies. They collapsed primarily because of fraud at the top ranks of the company. And President Bush asked me to lead the Enron prosecution. And one of the things that I learned early on was the importance of the board of directors making certain and holding management and the executives responsible for the conduct of the business. And I'll get back to that. And the other thing I learned early on were the failures of our profession, the lawyers, in giving proper counsel to the board of directors. So let me get to the board of directors. Almost without fail, every large company that I've seen that's had fraud problems and has experienced all kinds of harm to their shareholders and employees as a result of fraud is that the goals of the business are either make money, produce a new product, but one of the important things that has been left out of many corporations that have experienced scandal is that you need to do things the right way. You need to have ethical outcomes. Your ethical outcomes must be as important as the business outcomes. And so that's a problem that I've seen. It's a problem I think many responsible companies today are elevating the compliance officers in the company. And if any of you students are thinking about becoming a compliance officer, I think the compliance field is something that is growing, and it's something that's needed in a capitalist system that we have. But they're elevating the compliance and ethics people to the same level as the marketing and the finance people, because the ethical outcomes of a business must be as important as the performance outcomes. Now, with respect to we lawyers, the bankruptcy examiner of Enron said that the lawyers let the shareholders and the board down. The lawyers really knew what was going on and all the problems with these what's called off-balance sheet transactions that the Enron management had. They knew about them. They wrote memos about them to the file or to each other. But one of the things the examiner said in 2 words, they lacked, these lawyers, they lacked professional courage. They didn't have the courage to speak truth to power and to speak to the Enron management that the things they were doing were wrong. They didn't have the courage to bring these instances to the attention of the board of directors. And so one of the things that's very important for people, you don't have to be a lawyer, but any position you have, is that you have to have the professional courage to not do the wrong thing. And I still give people this counsel. I'm where I am at this stage of my life, and I don't have all the depth that you young people have, but you do have to be prepared to leave a job. If it's a job that doesn't fit with your morals, with your standards, at some point you've got to say, what's more important, my reputation or just getting the next paycheck? And so hopefully you will not have to confront that too many times in your career. I've had to confront it, and it's tough, But you know, I actually fired a client one time in my career. It was a top billing client, but I just simply couldn't do what the client wanted me to do. I went to the partners in my law firm, and my mentor in life, Judge Griffin Bell, who used to live in Glenn County before he passed away, and he agreed that this was the right thing to do. But it was not an easy thing to do, and it took money out of my pocket. But you have to be prepared to do that.
So, does anyone remember the movie The Devil's Advocate? Right, it was an Al Pacino movie. Right, Al Pacino's line in that movie was, you know, law is now the ultimate backstage pass. And he said that with sort of a twinkle in his eye, like he was getting away with something. And therein lies the challenge with what we do. We learn the problems that people have and companies have and the challenges that are out there and the way people are going about business that may or may not be in compliance with the law. But it is our job to push back at that. And that can be very difficult. But when you become a lawyer, that's what you buy into. That's what you're doing. You're not just going to law school to come out and make some money. You know, ultimately, you have a responsibility when you get your license, and that responsibility, as Larry said, is you know, to be able to say no occasionally. So I think that's very important. I only have a couple rules. People ask me all the time about my courtroom and what are the rules in my courtroom. And you would think there'd be a long list. There was a federal judge in the Southern District, who I will not name, that used to have a long list of rules underneath the glass tops of
I was here before you.
Yes. But, so there are judges out there that have these long lists of rules. I don't. I only have 2 rules, and I think this guides not just the courtroom, but I think it probably guides, I would hope guides, not just lawyers, but also anybody else that works in a professional endeavor. And that is, if you're going to come into my courtroom, you be professional and you be prepared. That's it. That's all you got to think about. Everything else just flows from that. All right? Whether you're an accountant, whether you're a doctor, whether you're a lawyer, even if you're a lineman, really anything. If you're professional about what you do, you care about what you do, and you set a standard, or you at least adhere to the standards of your profession, then you're going to be fine. You're going to be fine in my courtroom, and you're going to be fine in life. I'll tell you, the challenge that we're now having goes beyond sort of those simple rules, though. I would be remiss if we didn't at some point in this conversation talk about the challenge of AI and what AI is presenting in courtrooms and probably boardrooms nationwide. It's changing the game. It is and it's not a slow rising tide. It is a wave that is coming into the courtrooms. It's nothing I thought about 4 or 5 years ago, and it's now something I have to think about regularly. And it is challenging the profession. It is becoming very easy for people to just throw out a ChatGPT search and look for cases or arguments about whatever may be before the court and assume that that is sufficient, and it's not. That is a real challenge that we're going to have to address. Again, I don't think just within the legal profession, but in business and in many things that we do from this point forward. So to the next generation coming up, those of you that are students here, I look forward to you resolving all of those issues for us and seeing how we go.
Thank you, Judge, and thank you, General, for those comments. Well stated. Before I turn it into the witching hour here, and I've been threatened by Dr. Farley if I go over, I would at least like to open it up to the audience for a couple of questions. It's rare that we get the caliber of folks here before us that we have, and we're blessed by them. And at least if anyone has any questions, give you an opportunity. We could only have a couple, but I will open it to the floor. Some brave person, there we go. Go ahead.
My question is, how do you maintain personal integrity when legal decisions are politically or publicly unpopular?
Well, My view of that is it doesn't matter what the public perception is. We live in interesting times in the judiciary where politics seems to be thrown into every decision, or people want to draw politics in. I would suggest that you look at some of the comments that are being made along those lines and look for the narratives that people are pushing when they push ideas that judges' personal feelings are what are driving what they do. That's just my experience. It's just not the case. Again, I don't worry about it. If ultimately somebody disagrees with me, that is their right. If I do my job correctly, folks will understand the decision whether they agree with it or not. And so that is, it's a great question because it forces us to explain to us, being the independent judiciary, it forces us to explain to people why it's important that not matter. We were talking about this just before this, the whole idea of the rule of law, okay? So let me just throw this out there, and this could be a whole hour, but I'm going to do this in about 2 minutes. The rule of law is an idea. It is nothing else. Okay? We all talk about the sanctity of the rule of law, that no man is above the law. But that idea can be shifted, right, by a vocal minority or the majority. And I think what we're seeing currently in the world of politics and attacks upon the independence of the judiciary are people that are looking to move that definition in whatever direction they feel is most beneficial to them. That doesn't change the way I define it. Okay? So I guess again, we could talk about that for a long time. But that's the challenge of today's age. Your question's a great question, because these days it does appear, if you watch the news, that you've got all these influenced judges out there. It's just not the case.
Thank you.
I agree with everything the judge said. I'd just like to add that in our process, our judicial process, individuals, whether they're popular or unpopular, heinous, may have committed or alleged to have committed a heinous crime, they are entitled to legal representation. And at some point, they are entitled to a lawyer. And just because I'm representing someone you think is an awful person, an awful company, that's my job. And my job is to zealously represent that person. And just understand the process. We have an adversary process in our country. So the government cannot, somebody in the government cannot wake up one morning and say, I don't like Larry Thompson, I want to put him in jail. That's not the way the system works. That works.
One more question? Go ahead. We have two. Go ahead.
I was wondering, in a manner of process depending, if it's easier to become a federal or public enforcement, like in Judge Atwood's case, he became a federal agent and then later on became a judge. If that was an easier route to take to get a more hands-on or personal experience for the law that would end up being passed in a courtroom before going or during any sort of law school endeavors by the book.
So and I'm going to paraphrase a little bit. What you're asking is whether or not practical experience early on is better than simply going on to school and just trying to figure it all out. Okay. So if that's the question, I spent 2 years before law school after I graduated working for an environmental consulting firm. Got a bunch of practical experience and understood why I wanted to go to law school when I went to law school. And I say that for some of you who are thinking about law school, don't just go to law school because you can't think of something else to do. Right? It's just not a profession that works like that. getting some practical experience, if you have any doubts, getting some practical experience is always helpful. So I don't think either pathway is necessarily better. It's what works for you. All right? I learned a lot in the 2 years I worked before I went to law school, and it made me a better law student. I'm not sure that I would have done as well in law school as I did had I gone straight through. I think it's the best way I can describe it.
I have nothing to add.
Well, I think we're up against the time limit a little bit. Unfortunately, I think we can go on all night. But before I turn it over to our provost, Dr. Herbert Vargas, for closing remarks, I deeply want to thank all of you for being here, particularly our students for being here. And I hope you'll join me in thanking these two distinguished speakers. What a blessing they have been.